The sky above Clearwater Bay churned with an unnatural fury, dark clouds boiling and folding over one another as the first warnings screamed through the radio perched on the counter of the Baylight Diner. Inside, the hum of the flickering fluorescent lights struggled against the rising wind. The world outside had turned gray, rain beginning to lash sideways across the empty parking lot. Only one person remained inside, Maya Lopez, 26 years old, standing behind the counter with her apron still tied, her hair pulled into a hasty bun that could not contain the frizz forming from the humid air. The place was silent except for the wind's growing howl and the rhythmic ticking of the clock above the register. She had stayed behind when everyone else closed early. The owner, Mr. Finnegan, had begged her to lock up and go home, but Maya couldn't leave yet. She had nowhere safer to go. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her, was bedridden in a small apartment 3 blocks away. The old building had survived storms before, but not one like this, not Hurricane Adrian. The newscasters said it would hit the coast within the hour. Maya had stocked her grandmother with food, batteries, and water before rushing back to the diner to check the windows one last time, securing the latches and moving perishables into the freezer in case the power failed. It wasn't just duty, it was something deeper. This place was her second home, her only steady ground since her mother's death 7 years ago. The bell over the door clanged suddenly, and Maya nearly dropped the radio. A gust of wind followed as the door swung wide, carrying with it a swirl of rain and sea salt. For a second she thought it was a rescue team or a stranded driver. But then she saw the car, a sleek black Mercedes idling in front of the diner, and the man who stepped through the door looked entirely out of place against the storm's chaos. He wore an expensive gray suit, his white shirt now plastered to his body, his expression equal parts annoyance and disbelief. Behind him, more headlights pierced the storm, one after another, forming a trail of expensive vehicles pulling into the diner's lot. "Are you kidding me?" the man barked, slamming the door shut behind him. "This is the only place open?" Maya straightened, still holding the towel she'd been using to dry the counter. "Last I checked," she said evenly, "the governor called for an evacuation. Not dinner reservations." The man blinked, caught off guard by her calm tone. A second later, 11 more men stumbled through the door, soaked to the bone but radiating the same aura of wealth and impatience. Designer coats, polished shoes ruined by puddles, watches that probably cost more than the diner's annual rent. They looked like a board meeting dropped into a hurricane. The first man took the lead again, shaking his hair and trying to regain composure. "We were at the Seabreeze Resort," he said, brushing rain off his sleeve. "Power went out. Roads flooded. The staff evacuated before we could reach the highway. Our cars barely made it through the last stretch. We need shelter until this thing passes." Maya looked past him at the rain hammering the glass, then back at the 12 men now dripping all over her clean floor. "Shelter, not service," she clarified. "Kitchen's closed, generators weak, and I don't have time to play hostess." "We can pay," another man interrupted, pulling out his wallet, a flash of black leather and gold. His accent had a European edge. "Whatever you need." "You can't buy your way out of a Category 4, she replied, folding the towel and setting it aside. Her voice held a steadiness that quieted the room. "You can stay. But don't expect room service." There was a pause, the kind that happens when people who are used to giving orders realize they've just been given one. The leader, the man in the gray suit, studied her with something between frustration and curiosity. "What's your name?" "Maya." "Grant Sinclair," he said after a beat. "Sinclair Group." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Congratulations," she said dryly, grabbing a stack of towels. "You're all going to help keep the windows from breaking." The absurdity of it struck him. Billionaires, CEOs, investors, and founders now at the mercy of a waitress in a half-lit diner. But the storm outside screamed louder than pride, and within minutes the group was following her instructions, holding boards against rattling glass, moving furniture from danger zones. Grant found himself next to Maya at the front window, gripping the wooden frame as the wind pounded like a fist. "You're awfully calm for someone sitting in a hurricane," he said, voice raised over the noise. "Calm doesn't stop a storm," she replied. But panic never helped anyone either. The lights flickered, went out, then flared again under the weak hum of the backup generator. Someone cursed quietly. Maya set a lantern on the counter and turned it on, its yellow light spilling across the diner's chrome surfaces. "Sit tight," she said. "We're going to lose power soon." Grant turned to the others, men who were used to offices of glass and steel, now trapped in a world of metal stools and cracked tile. The storm was stripping away everything they relied on: control, distance, certainty. He looked back at Maya, her face lit by lantern glow, jaw tight with quiet determination. Something about her composure unsettled him. She wasn't afraid of them, not impressed either. Just focused. As the hours dragged on, the wind intensified. Rain drove against the windows in relentless sheets. They could hear distant booms, transformers blowing, roofs ripping free. One of the men, a venture capitalist named Lawrence, began pacing. "This place isn't safe. We should find a stronger building." "You won't make it 10 feet outside," Maya said without looking up from the lantern she was refueling. Wind's already at 80 miles per hour. She's right, Grant admitted reluctantly. He had seen the waves on their way in, massive angry walls of gray swallowing the road. Leaving now would be suicide. How long have you been working here? He asked, trying to fill the silence. 5 years, she said. Long enough to know this building holds better than most. It's been rebuilt twice since the 70s. And you stayed behind instead of evacuating? She glanced at him. Someone has to make sure it's still here tomorrow. The answer hung in the air. There was something in her tone, a quiet sense of loss, of memories tied to this place. Grant wanted to ask more, but the sound of shattering glass cut through the moment. A window near the kitchen exploded inward, spraying shards and rain across the floor. The men ducked instinctively. Maya didn't flinch. She grabbed a sheet of plywood from behind the counter, thrust it toward Grant. Hold it steady. Together they pressed it against the frame, the wind howling through the opening as they secured it with nails and tape. By the time they finished, everyone was soaked and panting. The generator sputtered, lights dimming again. One of the men muttered about suing the resort. Another about how this would make headlines. Maya shot them a look that silenced the complaints. You're alive. That's headline enough. Hours blurred together. Midnight came and went. The storm roared at its peak and the diner became their world, a small island of light in an ocean of chaos. Maya brewed instant coffee on a camping stove she kept for emergencies. When she passed out mugs, a few of the men stared as if she were serving gold. You're really not afraid? Grant asked quietly when she brought him his cup. Maya hesitated before answering. I've been through worse storms. Some don't come from the sky. The line lingered, heavy with implication. He wanted to ask what she meant, but something told him not to. She was letting him see just enough to respect her, not enough to pity her. By 2 a.m. the wind began to change pitch, that eerie low hum signaling the eye passing over. Outside, debris littered the streets, signs, branches, parts of roofs. The silence after the storm's peak was worse than the noise. It felt like the world holding its breath. Maya walked around the diner, checking the windows, her flashlight beam sweeping over tired faces. Some of the men were asleep, their suits draped over chairs, their million-dollar watches ticking pointlessly. Grant followed her. You do this for everyone, or are we special? You were just unlucky enough to get caught here, she said with a faint smile. But yeah, I help whoever walks through that door. It's what people are supposed to do. You sound like you still believe in people. Somebody has to. The wind began to rise again, the back half of the hurricane returning. Maya sighed, rubbing her eyes. Round 2. Stay away from the windows. Grant watched her move, tireless, steady, every motion purposeful. Something about her felt like gravity, drawing chaos into order. He wasn't used to feeling small, but tonight he did. He was a man who built empires from spreadsheets and acquisitions, who turned failure into profit. Yet here, in this flickering diner with a woman who earned more in tips than salary, he realized how little control he really had over anything that mattered. Thunder rolled. The power flickered again. And through the din of wind and rain, he heard Maya whisper softly, almost to herself, "Please hold just one more night." The words weren't about the diner, not really. He could hear it, the quiet plea of someone who had lost before and refused to lose again. As dawn began to hint on the horizon, the hurricane's fury slowly waned. The air grew heavy but still. Exhausted, Maya sank into one of the booths, her apron soaked, her hair clinging to her face. The 12 millionaires sat scattered around the room, humbled, quiet, unsure how to bridge the gap between their world and hers. Grant looked at her and realized something that would stay with him long after the storm. He had come here by accident, but this night had been the most human thing he'd experienced in years. For the first time in his life, Grant Sinclair didn't have a solution. All he could do was sit in the same silence as everyone else, watching the dawn bleed through the clouds, wondering what this woman, this waitress, had just changed inside him. If you're still here after the storm, you already understand what Maya meant. That kindness outlasts any hurricane. Subscribe, comment, and share this story so it doesn't get lost in the noise. Let the world see what happens when one act of courage changes 12 lives forever. The morning after the hurricane's peak broke in slow motion. Gray light filtered through the boarded windows of the Baylight Diner, revealing the wreckage outside, shredded trees, flooded streets, and twisted metal that had once been traffic signs. Inside, the silence felt almost sacred. The 12 men stirred one by one, their fine clothes wrinkled, their eyes groggy. They looked like they had survived something primal, something money had no power over. Maya Lopez moved quietly through the diner, checking each window for cracks, making notes on a yellow pad she found near the register. Her hands were steady even though exhaustion lined her face. She hadn't slept more than an hour. The storm might have passed, but the aftermath had only begun. The generator buzzed weakly, keeping the lights dim and the air thick with the smell of gasoline. Coffee brewed in a dented pot, the aroma filling the space with a strange sense of normalcy. Grant Sinclair sat in the booth nearest the counter watching her work. His suit jacket was gone, replaced with a flannel shirt someone had found in the storage closet. His phone had died hours ago, leaving him stranded in a way he hadn't felt since childhood. He had built an empire on control of numbers, people, outcomes, and now he couldn't even find a signal. It unnerved him how small that made him feel. "You don't stop, do you?" he asked as she passed by with a clipboard. Maya barely looked up. "The roof's leaking over the pantry. Need to patch it before it ruins the dry goods. You should rest. You should too." Her reply was firm but not unkind. "No one's going anywhere until the road's clear." Grant rubbed his temple, glancing around at the others. One man scrolled through a dead phone out of habit. Another stared out the boarded window as if his wealth could summon a rescue team. They were brilliant in their boardrooms but useless here, stripped of everything that defined them. "You run this place alone?" Grant asked after a pause. Maya nodded, tightening her ponytail. "Finnegan owns it, but he's 70 and lives inland. During storms it's just me." "You could have left." "Could have," she said simply. "But there are always people who show up here when they shouldn't. Families who get stuck, drivers who can't see through the rain. Someone needs to keep the lights on." Grant leaned back, studying her. "You talk like someone who's been through this before." "I have." He waited, sensing more behind the brevity, but Maya turned away, filling mugs with coffee. One by one she handed them out, moving among men who had likely never been served without a tip or expectation. When she reached Grant, he caught her wrist lightly. "Why do you keep helping us?" Her eyes lifted to his, calm, unwavering. "Because that's what decent people do when the world falls apart." The word struck deeper than she knew. For a long moment, Grant said nothing. Then he released her hand and took the mug, watching as she moved to the others. Around them, conversation began to stir, hesitant at first, then building like cautious friendship between strangers. "I haven't been this uncomfortable since my first internship," one of the men joked. A ripple of laughter followed. Maya smiled faintly without looking up. "Remind me to never travel during hurricane season again," another muttered. "Remind me to hire someone who checks weather reports," Grant added, surprising himself. The group laughed again, this time with real warmth. As the morning wore on, Maya organized tasks. She sent 2 of them to clear debris from the entrance, another to check the breaker box. They followed her instructions like soldiers, half out of boredom, half out of respect. It was strange, this reversal of power. These were men used to commanding entire companies, yet here they were taking orders from a waitress. By noon, the rain had softened to a drizzle. The power lines outside sagged like broken vines. One of the men, a venture capitalist named David Lang, finally found faint cell service and announced the highway was flooded for at least another day. A few groaned. Others slumped back into their seats. Maya served canned soup she'd heated on a portable burner. It wasn't gourmet, but after 2 days of adrenaline, it tasted like a feast. She sat only when everyone else had eaten. Grant studied her again. There was something he couldn't reconcile: her composure, her precision, the way she spoke with quiet authority. This wasn't a woman who belonged behind a counter. There was discipline in her tone, intellect in her eyes. When she finally sat down with her own bowl, he asked softly, "What did you do before this?" She looked up, spoon halfway to her lips. "Before what?" "Before the diner." Maya hesitated, then said, "I studied architecture. Dropped out after the hurricane in 2015. We lost everything." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I rebuilt what I could." "You could still go back," Grant said. "You're clearly capable." "Capable doesn't pay tuition when FEMA paperwork gets lost for 2 years." Her voice held no bitterness, just fact. "Besides, my grandmother needed care. Dreams can wait when people can't." Grant nodded slowly. For the first time in years he found himself without a response. Every problem he'd ever faced had been solvable with enough leverage or money. But the problem she spoke of belonged to a different universe, one that didn't bend to wealth or ego. Outside, the sun began to break through the clouds. A beam of light pierced the boarded windows, landing on the counter where Maya's name tag lay beside a pile of wet receipts. The sight struck Grant oddly, how something so small, so ordinary could command so much quiet power. "You said you've seen worse storms," he said after a while. "What did you mean?" Maya's expression softened. "Not every storm comes from the sky, Mr. Sinclair." He looked at her, waiting. She sighed, setting down her spoon. "My mother was a nurse. Worked double shifts for years. When my father left, she kept us afloat. Then Hurricane Elias hit. I was 19. The roof collapsed. She was trapped inside. By the time help came, it was too late." The room went quiet again. The men who had once complained about cold coffee now sat speechless. Maya continued, her tone steady. "After that, I decided I'd never run from a storm again. If I could save even one person the way no one could save her, I would." Grant swallowed hard. For once, he didn't see her as a waitress or a symbol of humility. He saw her as a survivor, someone who had turned loss into duty. "You remind me of my mother," he said quietly. Maya blinked. "She ran a diner?" "She ran everything. My father's company, our home, me. He took credit for the empire she built until she died, and I swore I'd prove her work mattered. I built Sinclair Group from her philosophy, precision, discipline, compassion. But somewhere along the way I forgot that last part. Their eyes met in the half-light, two people from different worlds, bound by storms that had shaped them in different ways. Then Maya broke the moment, standing and collecting empty bowls. Eat while you can, she said to the room. You'll need strength to clean up outside. Grant watched her walk away, realizing something he hadn't expected. He didn't want to leave when the roads opened. For the first time in years he felt human, grounded, stripped of everything that made him untouchable. By afternoon the group worked together under Maya's quiet direction. They cleared fallen branches from the entrance, stacked sandbags and swept away debris. She climbed a ladder to patch the roof, Grant steadying it without being asked. Each man seemed to fall under her rhythm, unspoken trust, unforced cooperation. At one point a gust of wind knocked over the ladder slightly. Grant's hand shot out, gripping her ankle. Careful, he said. She laughed lightly. Relax, Mr. Sinclair. I'm tougher than I look. I don't doubt it. Evening returned with long shadows stretching through the diner. The group had grown quieter, calmer, their usual arrogance softened by exhaustion. They sat around the counter eating the last of the canned soup. The storm had stripped them of titles and pretense. Now they were just people, grateful, tired, and strangely content. As the generator sputtered again, Maya lit a row of candles. Their soft glow made the diner look almost warm, like a sanctuary. One of the men broke the silence. If this were one of those inspirational movies, this is where we'd all learn something profound. Maya smiled faintly. Maybe you already have. Yeah. David Lang said with a smirk. And what lesson is that? That sometimes the person you think has the least to offer ends up saving you. The laughter that followed wasn't mocking. It was genuine, the sound of 12 powerful men acknowledging truth. Grant looked at her in the candlelight and realized she had just articulated what every one of them felt but hadn't said aloud. The night stretched on, quieter this time. The worst was over, but the weight of the experience hung in the air. As Maya finally sat, leaning against the counter, Grant poured her a cup of coffee. For the record, he said softly, you saved 12 men who thought they didn't need saving. For the record, she replied, I just gave you a place to stay dry. Same thing. Maya took a sip, shaking her head. You're all heading back to your glass towers tomorrow. Don't romanticize this. People don't change overnight. Maybe not, Grant said, but sometimes it only takes one night to start. Maya looked at him, searching his expression for the arrogance she'd seen when he first arrived. It was gone. In its place was sincerity, and something else, something unspoken. Gratitude maybe. Respect. As the candles burned lower and the storm clouds thinned, the diner seemed to exhale. For now, the hurricane had ended, but something far stronger was brewing quietly beneath the surface. A reckoning neither Maya nor the 12 men could have predicted. And though she didn't know it yet, by the next sunrise her life, and theirs, would never be the same again. By dawn, the worst of the wind had quieted, leaving behind an eerie calm that felt heavier than the storm itself. Outside, Clearwater Bay looked like a battlefield. Broken signs lay twisted in the road, tree branches tangled in power lines, and the ocean, still churning, had crept inland far enough to flood the diner's parking lot. The Baylight Diner stood like a survivor among wreckage, battered but unbroken. Inside, Maya Lopez leaned against the counter, staring at the flickering generator light. Her hands trembled slightly as she refilled the coffee pot. She wasn't afraid anymore, just exhausted. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a deep ache in its place. The 12 men had slept where they could, sprawled across booths or leaning against the walls. When they woke one by one they didn't speak at first. It was the kind of silence that followed revelation, a shared awareness that something inside them had shifted. Gone were the commanding tones and clipped demands. What remained was humility, maybe even gratitude. Grant Sinclair was the first to approach her. His voice, once so sharp, was softer now. You should sit down, Maya. She didn't turn. Not yet. The fridge is holding steady but the generator's running on fumes. I need to transfer what I can before it dies. Then let me help. Maya blinked. The idea of a billionaire CEO hauling boxes of perishables was absurd, but when she looked at him she saw he wasn't joking. His sleeves were rolled up, his expression earnest. Without another word she handed him a crate. Together they moved silently through the dim kitchen, packing and sorting by lantern light. When the generator finally sputtered to a stop, the diner fell into a heavy, electric silence. Only the drip of melting water from the freezer broke the stillness. Now you can sit, Grant said quietly. Maya gave a tired smile. Bossy for someone out of his element. Maybe I'm learning to take orders instead of giving them. They sat at a booth near the window, the boards casting narrow stripes of sunlight across the table. Outside, the sky had cleared to a bruised blue, but the streets were impassable, a shallow sea of debris and standing water. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter droned, the first sign of recovery crews. Inside, however, time had stopped. For the first time in years, Maya felt seen, not as a waitress, not as a symbol of service, but as a person. "You really stayed here for strangers?" Grant asked after a long silence. "They wouldn't have stayed strangers for long," Maya said. "Storms make people honest. They strip away the filters." Grant nodded. "Maybe that's what we needed." "We?" she asked. "People like us," he said. Then, realizing how that sounded, added quickly, "I mean, people who forget what really matters." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You mean people who mistake money for worth?" Grant exhaled through a small laugh. "Yeah, that too." Across the diner, some of the other men had begun sweeping water out the door with brooms. Others organized the scattered chairs and collected broken glass into bins. It wasn't efficient, their movements clumsy, untrained, but the intent was pure. David Lang, who had spent most of the night complaining about his missing Wi-Fi signal, was now duct-taping cracks along the baseboards with the focus of a man trying to make amends. Lawrence, the British investor, had rolled up his sleeves and was handing out bottled water like a volunteer. It was as though Maya's quiet resilience had infected them all. When she stood to help, Grant caught her wrist gently. "Let them do something useful. They don't know how to fix what's broken," she said softly. "Maybe not," Grant admitted, "but they're trying. That's new for some of them." The faintest smile tugged at Maya's lips. She sat back down watching the men work. It was strangely beautiful. 12 millionaires, men used to luxury, moving with uncoordinated grace to repair a place they would normally overlook. Maybe this was what she had meant about storms making people honest. Hours passed. By midday the group had cleaned most of the interior. The sun, shining high now, glinted off the floodwaters outside. They gathered at the counter, their exhaustion giving way to something unfamiliar: comfort. The diner, once a refuge, had become their home for the moment. "So Maya," Lawrence said between sips of lukewarm coffee, "what happens next for you? You rebuild, reopen, carry on?" She shrugged. "That's the plan. I've been through worse seasons." "You can't do it alone," another said. "I've been doing it alone for years." Grant leaned forward. "Maybe that's the problem." Her eyes flicked to his. "What's that supposed to mean?" "That people like you carry the world until it breaks you. You help everyone else but no one helps you." "I don't need saving, Mr. Sinclair." "I didn't say you did." His voice softened. "I'm saying maybe you deserve something back." She studied him for a moment, then looked away, uncomfortable with his sincerity. Compliments had always come wrapped in condescension before, but this was different. His words weren't flattery, they were observation. And that unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. The afternoon sun spilled through cracks in the boards, painting the diner in gold. The world outside hummed faintly with the sound of rescue vehicles. For the first time since the storm began, Maya felt the heaviness lift. Maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Then, faintly, she heard it, a voice crackling through the emergency radio. The broadcast announced that several nearby communities had lost contact, that aid might take days to arrive. Maya turned up the volume. "They're saying the bridges are out," she murmured. The men fell silent again. Grant set down his cup. "So we're really stuck here." "For now," Maya said. "But we have food, water, and a roof. That's more than most right now." Her calm steadied them all. Even fear seemed to lose its edge in her presence. Later, as the day stretched toward evening, Maya stepped outside for the first time since the storm. The air was thick with salt and mud, the ground soft underfoot. The men followed, their expensive shoes sinking into puddles. The scene was devastating. Boats stranded on sidewalks, cars overturned, palm trees uprooted. Yet in the destruction there was an odd beauty, the quiet resilience of survival. Seagulls circled overhead, crying into the open sky. Grant stopped beside her. "It's surreal," he said. "Yesterday I was worrying about a merger. Today I'm just grateful to be alive." "That's perspective," Maya replied. "It doesn't last for most people, though." He looked at her. "Maybe it should." "Maybe it will," she said, not quite believing it. They walked the perimeter of the diner together, assessing damage. She pointed out where the roof needed new flashing, where the windows would have to be replaced. Grant listened carefully, mentally noting each detail. "What would it cost to fix all this?" he asked. She laughed under her breath. "More than I have, less than you think." "That's not an answer." "I don't have one. I'll figure it out like I always do." Grant was silent for a moment. Then, "When I was your age I thought success meant never depending on anyone. But I see now that real strength is being able to carry others without losing yourself. You've got that. It's rare. And dangerous," she said softly. "People mistake kindness for weakness. Then they've never met someone like you." The air hung heavy between them. For the first time, Maya couldn't think of something sharp to say. Instead, she turned toward the horizon, where the first signs of dusk colored the sky. Back inside, the others had started a small fire in the portable stove. They roasted canned beans and shared stories, half confessions, half jokes. Maya listened quietly as they spoke about their childhoods, their failures, their regrets. The bravado that had filled the diner 2 days ago had melted into something human. "I can't remember the last time I laughed this much without checking my phone," David Lang said, shaking his head. "Maybe it took a hurricane to remind me what real life feels like." "Maybe it took a waitress," Lawrence corrected, raising his cup in a mock toast. Maya blushed faintly, looking down. "Don't make me your moral mascot." "Too late," someone said. Laughter followed, not the polished laughter of men networking at a gala, but the genuine laughter of people who had survived something together. As night fell, the wind returned, softer this time. The candles flickered again, casting long shadows. Grant sat across from Maya, watching her as she wrote in her notebook, a list of supplies, repairs, and names of people she wanted to check on once the roads reopened. "You're already planning the rebuild," he said. "That's what comes next after surviving. And after rebuilding? You keep going." Grant leaned forward. "What if you didn't have to keep doing this alone?" She glanced up, sensing the weight of his words. "What are you offering?" "Help. Resources. Whatever it takes." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because this storm reminded me that some investments aren't about profit. They're about impact." She met his gaze for a long moment. "I've heard that before. Usually from people who want something back. Maybe I just want to see someone like you win for once." Her eyes softened, but her tone stayed cautious. "And if I say no? Then I'll keep my distance. But I'll still show up to help." The hum of the dying fire filled the silence between them. Maya stared at the flickering flame, unsure whether to trust him, unsure if kindness from a man like Grant could be genuine. But something about his eyes told her he wasn't playing games this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "We'll talk when the roads open." "Fair enough." He smiled, and for the first time in years, it wasn't a corporate smile. It was real, soft, unguarded, grateful. As the night deepened, the group settled into a fragile peace. They shared what was left of their food, told stories until the stars returned above the storm-broken clouds, and drifted to sleep under the hum of quiet gratitude. But Maya stayed awake long after the others slept. She watched the candle burn lower, her reflection wavering in the window glass. Something inside her had shifted too, a strange mix of hope and fear. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that this night had changed everything. Outside, the floodwaters glimmered in the moonlight, and for the first time in years, Maya felt the weight of her loneliness lift. The hurricane had taken much, but it had also left her with something unexpected. A room full of changed men, and one in particular whose kindness felt like the calm after the storm. Morning arrived with a brilliance that felt almost mocking, gold sunlight spilling across a landscape of ruin. The hurricane had passed, but the scars it left were everywhere. Uprooted palms, shattered glass glinting on the streets, rooftops peeled away like tin foil. The air was still, heavy with humidity and the faint scent of salt and gasoline. For the first time in 3 days, the wind had stopped screaming and silence felt strange. Inside the Baylight diner, the 12 millionaires stirred slowly from sleep. They looked less like titans of industry and more like weary survivors, disheveled, unshaven, still wrapped in borrowed blankets. The storm had taken away their sheen of invincibility, and what remained were just men, human, vulnerable, grateful. Maya Lopez stood at the counter, her hair messy, apron streaked with dust. She was boiling water on the camp stove for coffee when the door creaked open. Sunlight spilled through as Grant Sinclair stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the glare. The parking lot was half submerged in a shallow tide, reflecting the diner in ripples of muddy water. He turned back to look at her. She was standing in the doorway now, silhouetted by the morning light. "You made it through," he said softly. "We all did," Maya replied. "That's what matters." For a moment they just stood there, watching the sun rise over the wreckage. The storm had stripped the world to its bones, but somehow that made everything feel more honest. The chaos was gone. What was left was clarity. Behind them, the other men began to gather, stepping outside into the new day. They spoke quietly among themselves, pointing out the damage, checking their vehicles, testing their phones. None of them worked yet. The cell towers were still down. David Lang kicked at a loose board floating by. "Guess we won't be getting a helicopter out anytime soon." "You say that like it's a bad thing," Lawrence said, squinting toward the horizon. "When was the last time any of us had to just wait?" "Maybe that's the point," Grant said. His voice carried a thoughtful tone that made the others turn. "Maybe we were supposed to." They didn't fully understand what he meant, but the silence that followed was comfortable. A kind of collective understanding that words couldn't quite reach. Back inside, Maya cleared the tables, her movements slow but deliberate. She found herself humming softly, a habit she developed years ago to steady her mind during crises. When she turned, Grant was leaning against the doorway again, watching her. There was something different in his expression, a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. "You should take a break," he said. "If I stop moving, I'll crash," she replied with a tired smile. "Then at least let me help." She didn't argue this time. He joined her at the counter, sorting through dishes, wiping down surfaces. It was absurd, really, the founder of a multi-billion-dollar firm scrubbing plates beside a waitress in a flooded diner, but neither mentioned it. The rhythm of work felt grounding. Around noon, they heard the first convoy of emergency vehicles in the distance. A collective relief spread through the diner. People began stepping outside, waving at the approaching trucks. Rescue teams moved through the streets, checking buildings, calling out for survivors. Maya stepped out with them, blinking against the bright light. A firefighter approached her, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, is everyone here accounted for?" 13 of us, she said. "All safe." He nodded. "Good. Power's out countywide. Relief crews will be setting up generators at the school by tonight. If you need food or medical help." "We're fine for now," Maya interrupted. "But thank you." Grant watched her handle the conversation with calm authority. Even the rescue team seemed to take cues from her tone. When the firefighter moved on, he turned to her. "You really are something else, you know that?" "I'm just doing what anyone should," she said. "No," he said quietly. "You're doing what most people wouldn't." Maya looked away, her cheeks flushing slightly. Compliments still made her uneasy. She started walking toward the diner again, but Grant followed. "What happens now?" he asked. "Clean up," she said simply. "Then we rebuild. Then we go back to pretending everything's normal." He smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who's already made peace with chaos. When you live on the coast, you learn to. And when you don't? Then the first storm humbles you." Grant fell quiet, letting her words sink in. He knew she was right. He thought about all the storms he'd avoided in life, not the literal ones but the moral ones, the emotional ones. Maybe it was time he faced one head-on. As the day wore on, the group began to pack what little they had. The roads, though still wet, were beginning to clear. Power crews moved methodically through the area, and the hum of distant machinery filled the air. Maya refused to rest. She directed volunteers, helped sweep debris, and checked in with neighboring shops. The others followed her lead, lending hands wherever they could. When the first line of cars finally rolled past, National Guard vehicles escorting convoys toward town, the men began discussing how they'd return to the city. There was talk of helicopters, of private jets once the airport reopened. Maya listened quietly but said nothing. She had no jet to catch. When this was over, she would still be here, in the same diner with the same debts, facing the same uphill climb. By evening, as the sky turned amber, Grant approached her again. "You're not coming back to the city?" "No reason to. My life's here." "But it doesn't have to be," he said. "You could do more. Be more. You're—" "Don't," she cut in gently. "Don't make this a fairy tale. People like me don't get rescued. We survive. That's enough." Grant looked at her, searching for the right words but found none. There was truth in her defiance, truth he couldn't argue with. "Then at least let me say thank you," he said quietly. "For everything." Maya nodded once. "You already did. You listened." It wasn't the kind of gratitude he was used to, no contracts, no publicity, just simple acknowledgement. Somehow it meant more. The sun dipped lower. The water began to recede, leaving behind the warped reflections of neon signs and broken asphalt. One by one, the 12 men gathered near the entrance. Their cars, though battered, were drivable again. Grant lingered behind as the others exchanged handshakes and quiet goodbyes. "You sure you'll be all right?" he asked. "I'll manage," Maya said. "I always do." He hesitated. "You know, most people would have taken advantage of us that night. Charged triple. Made it transactional. I wasn't raised that way," she said simply. "And besides, kindness shouldn't come with a price tag." Grant smiled faintly. If only more people thought like that. "Then maybe the world wouldn't need saving so often," she replied. He wanted to say more, to promise something, to tell her he wouldn't forget, but the words caught in his throat. She had a way of making him feel both humbled and seen. So instead, he nodded, turned toward his car, and joined the slow procession of vehicles heading north. As the engines faded, the quiet returned. Maya stood at the doorway, the wind tugging at her apron, and felt the ache of solitude settle in again. The storm had taken so much, but the silence it left behind felt lonelier than ever. She spent the evening sweeping out mud, patching leaks, organizing what could be salvaged. When night fell, she made tea and sat in the corner booth, staring out at the ghostly reflection of the diner's sign in the floodwater. It flickered weakly, half the bulbs blown, half stubbornly burning. For a moment, she wondered if she'd ever see any of them again. Probably not. Men like that didn't return to small-town diners. They moved on, back to glass towers and marble floors, to lives untouched by places like this. She sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Maybe that was how it was meant to be. Maybe she was meant to be a footnote in someone else's story, a reminder of decency they'd remember for a week before forgetting again. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. 3 weeks later, the Baylight Diner reopened. The power was restored, the roof repaired, and the floor polished back to its dull shine. Business trickled in slowly at first, construction crews, locals, a few curious passers-by. Maya worked quietly, grateful to feel normal again. But that peace wouldn't last. It began with the sound of engines. Dozens at first, then more. By the time she stepped outside, the road was lined with cars, sleek, spotless machines gleaming under the noon sun. Bentleys, Ferraris, Rolls-Royces, Aston Martins. They stretched as far as the eye could see, filling the street, the sidewalks, even the empty lot across the road. Maya froze, her towel still in hand. What in the world? From the nearest car stepped Grant Sinclair, dressed in a simple navy suit this time, no entourage, no arrogance, just calm purpose. Behind him came the others, the 12 men she had sheltered. But they weren't alone. With them were drivers, assistants, journalists, and crews unloading boxes. Maya blinked, stunned. Grant? He smiled. Told you we'd talk when the roads opened. What is all this? She asked, her voice unsteady. A thank you, he said simply. And a promise kept. Before she could speak, a delivery truck pulled up, bearing a banner that read, Baylight Relief Fund, in honor of Maya Lopez. Behind it, another vehicle arrived, and another. Each carried supplies. Generators, new kitchen equipment, construction materials. A crowd had gathered now. Neighbors, volunteers, even local reporters drawn by the spectacle of luxury cars in a storm-torn town. Grant stepped closer, lowering his voice. We set up a foundation. For disaster relief, for small business recovery, starting here. You gave 12 men a place to survive. Now it's our turn to give others the same chance. Maya stared at him, speechless. You didn't have to. Maybe not, he said, but we wanted to. You reminded us what decency looks like. The least we can do is make sure it spreads. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. The street around her buzzed with life, the sound of engines, laughter, cameras clicking. For the first time in years she wasn't invisible. Grant extended a hand. Let us help rebuild, not just your diner but your future. She looked at him, the sunlight glinting off the water behind him, and finally took his hand. And for the first time since the storm, Maya let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had survived for something greater than survival itself. The noise outside the Baylight Diner built slowly, like a tide rising. Dozens of reporters had gathered, cameras clicking, voices overlapping as words spread across Clearwater Bay. The waitress who had sheltered 12 millionaires during a hurricane had just been honored with a convoy of 140 luxury cars. It looked like something out of a dream, or a film, but to Maya Lopez it still didn't feel real. The afternoon sun glimmered off the chrome of the cars lined down the street. People crowded the sidewalks, holding up phones, recording everything. The once silent diner had become the center of national attention overnight. And through it all, Maya stood on the front steps, hands trembling slightly as she tried to take in the scene. It wasn't pride she felt, it was disbelief mixed with something deeper, fear that it would all vanish just as quickly as it appeared. Grant Sinclair stood beside her, calm as ever. You okay? He asked quietly, watching her expression. I don't know, Maya admitted. This doesn't happen to people like me. Maybe it should, he said simply. Behind them, a small stage had been set up. The mayor, flanked by volunteers and local news crews, was preparing to speak. The banner behind the podium read, Baylight Renewal Initiative, in partnership with the Sinclair Foundation. Maya stared at it, still processing. She hadn't known Grant planned anything this big. When she glanced at him, he only smiled faintly as if reading her thoughts. You said kindness shouldn't have a price tag, he said. So I made sure this isn't one. No speeches about corporate giving, no names on plaques. This is about you, what you did, and what it means for everyone watching. I didn't do it for this, she said softly. I know. That's why it matters. The mayor stepped up to the microphone, his voice booming through the speakers. He spoke about community, resilience, and courage, How one woman's act of compassion had inspired a movement. Maya tried to listen, but her thoughts drifted to that night. The sound of the wind screaming through the diner, the fear in those men's eyes, the silence when the storm finally stopped. It all felt like another lifetime. When the applause came, she didn't step forward right away. Grant nudged her gently. "They're waiting for you." "What do I even say?" she whispered. "Just tell the truth." Maya took a slow breath, then stepped up to the microphone. The crowd hushed. Reporters angled their cameras, lenses glinting like glass eyes. For a moment she froze, her voice caught somewhere between gratitude and shock. Then she found her words. "I don't know how to thank you all," she began, her tone quiet but steady. "3 weeks ago this place was nearly destroyed. I didn't think anyone outside this town would even notice. But the truth is, I didn't stay that night because I wanted recognition. I stayed because people needed help. That's it. That's all it ever was." Her voice grew stronger. "The world makes it easy to forget that we're supposed to care about each other. It makes us believe that kindness is weakness, or that helping someone won't change anything. But I've seen the opposite. One night, one storm, taught me that compassion still matters. And I think maybe that's what all of us need to remember. Storms don't destroy people, they reveal them." The crowd erupted into applause. Maya stepped back, blinking fast to hold back tears. When she turned, Grant was smiling, that quiet, proud smile of someone who didn't need to say anything. For once, the cameras weren't pointed at him. He liked it that way. After the ceremony, the crowd thinned as cars began to depart, but the donations remained. Pallets of supplies were unloaded into nearby shelters, volunteers organized food drives, and teams of contractors began inspecting damaged homes. It was as if the hurricane had been rewritten into something redemptive, a story of what humanity could still be when it chose compassion over convenience. Inside the diner, the noise faded to a low hum. The lunch rush had ended and Maya finally sat down. She stared at the counter, newly polished, freshly painted, and let the quiet settle. The last few weeks had been a blur. Interviews, calls, endless visits from strangers thanking her. The diner had become famous, but fame wasn't what she wanted. What she wanted was to feel normal again, to serve coffee, to hear the radio hum in the background, to feel the world settle back into rhythm. Grant entered quietly and took a seat across from her. He set 2 cups of coffee on the table, one for her, one for himself. "You look like you could use this." She smiled tiredly. "I haven't stopped moving in 3 weeks." "That's funny. You said the same thing during the hurricane." She laughed softly. "Guess some things don't change." They sat in silence for a while, the air between them filled with the faint buzz of the refrigerator and the hum of the neon sign outside. Finally Maya asked, "Why did you really come back? You could have sent someone else. Signed a check. Moved on." Grant looked into his cup, then met her eyes. "Because I didn't want to move on. That night changed me. It changed all of us. I realized that I'd spent years building things that didn't mean anything. Numbers, brands, headlines, but none of it ever made me feel human. You did. You reminded me what that was like." Maya shook her head gently. "I didn't do anything special." "You did everything special," he said quietly. "You treated us like people when we didn't deserve it. You gave when you had nothing. That's what strength looks like. And I wanted to make sure the world saw it too." She looked away, her eyes glistening. "You make it sound like I saved the world." "Maybe you saved what's left of it," he said. A long pause hung between them, not awkward but meaningful. Outside, the last of the reporters were leaving, their vans pulling away in a slow line down the street. The chaos was over now. What remained was the quiet promise of something new. Grant leaned forward. "We're funding the Baylight Relief Center next door, emergency supplies, food bank, disaster response training. But I wanted your help running it. Not as charity. As leadership." Maya's eyes widened. "You want me to run it? Who else could?" She hesitated. "Grant, I don't have a degree, I'm not trained." "You have something better," he interrupted. "You have heart. People trust that. The rest we can teach. You said it yourself, storms reveal people. Well, this one revealed a leader." Maya stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. For a moment she saw not the billionaire but the man she had shared coffee with during the darkest hours of the hurricane, the man who had helped board windows, who had listened when she told her story, who had understood what it meant to lose and still keep going. "Let me think about it," she said softly. "Take your time," he replied, standing. "But don't think too long. The world needs more people like you calling the shots." When he left, the diner felt quieter than before. Maya sat there for a long time, tracing her finger along the rim of her cup, watching the sunlight move across the floor. She wasn't used to being seen, not like this. It scared her. But it also gave her something she hadn't felt in years: hope. That evening the diner filled again. Locals came to eat, to talk, to take pictures of the famous Storm Diner and its humble owner. Maya smiled through it all, grateful but overwhelmed. When she finally closed for the night, she stood alone in the doorway, looking at the street where the luxury cars had been. The road was empty now, but their tire tracks remained, shining faintly in the streetlights, like a reminder that miracles sometimes leave marks behind. She turned off the sign, locking the door behind her. As she walked home through the cooling air, the sound of the ocean reached her, gentle now, no longer violent. The town would rebuild. The scars would fade. And somehow she would find her place in this new story. Weeks passed. The Baylight Relief Center opened its doors to the public, with Maya at the helm. At first she doubted herself, but slowly she grew into the role. Families came for supplies, volunteers arrived to help, and soon the center became the beating heart of the community. Reporters still called sometimes, but she stopped answering. This wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about purpose. Grant visited often, though never with cameras. He'd sit at the counter with his sleeves rolled up, drinking black coffee while she handled paperwork or greeted volunteers. Their friendship had grown into something steady, unspoken, easy. They didn't need grand gestures anymore. They had survived a storm together, and that was enough. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, he looked up from his coffee and said, "You ever think about that night?" "Every day," she said. "But not with fear anymore. More like gratitude. That storm broke me open. It showed me what I was made of." He smiled. "And what's that?" "Steel and kindness," she said simply. Grant chuckled. "That's a dangerous combination." Maya laughed, looking out the window at the sunset. "Maybe that's what the world needs." As evening settled, the diner lights glowed warmly across the street, reflecting off the wet pavement where the last rain had fallen. The sign still read Baylight Diner, but to everyone who passed, it meant something different now. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a symbol of compassion, survival, and the quiet power of one person doing the right thing. Maya stepped outside, standing beneath the sign as the wind shifted from the sea. She could smell salt and hope on the air. The storm that once threatened to end her life had, in a strange way, given it back to her. She looked toward the horizon, where the last light faded into gold, and whispered, "Thank you, Adrian, for everything." Then she turned back toward the diner, toward the laughter inside, the clatter of dishes, the hum of life restored, and smiled. This story moved you? Share it. Let the world remember that kindness still has power, that ordinary people can change everything. Subscribe, comment, and help keep stories like Maya's alive. Because storms will come again, but so will people like her. The morning sun poured through the wide windows of the Baylight Diner, painting long amber streaks across the new tiled floor. The smell of coffee mingled with salt air and the faint hum of distant waves. It had been 6 months since the hurricane, 6 months since that night when 12 powerful men found shelter under this very roof, and 6 months since Maya Lopez's life had changed forever. The world outside had returned to motion, cars, laughter, tourists, but inside time still carried the rhythm of that storm. Slow, deliberate, full of purpose. The diner had become more than just a place to eat. It had become a gathering point, for stories, for help, for hope. Photos of the reconstruction lined one wall, alongside snapshots of volunteers and community members who'd helped rebuild Clearwater Bay. Children who'd once eaten here with their parents now came by to hand Maya drawings of the brave waitress who saved the rich men. She always smiled, accepted their artwork, and pinned it up on the wall, but she never let the story grow into legend. She preferred to remember the truth. It wasn't about saving anyone, it was about staying human when it was hardest to. Grant Sinclair still visited, though not with the entourage he once carried everywhere. He came alone most days, sitting in the same corner booth, quietly drinking his coffee. The two had fallen into an easy companionship. No grand gestures, no headlines, just the kind of mutual respect that doesn't need explaining. Sometimes he'd bring paperwork from the Baylight Relief Center next door, asking for her input. Sometimes he just came to sit in silence. Maya had long stopped wondering why. She knew. The storm had stripped away his armor, and what was left was a man who'd finally learned how to listen. One quiet afternoon, as the rain whispered outside, Grant placed a folder on the counter. "You're not going to like this," he said, half smiling. Maya glanced at the folder warily. "What now?" "Expansion plans," he said. "Other coastal towns. We're calling it the Baylight Network. Disaster readiness centers modeled after yours." "Mine?" she said, surprised. Yours, he repeated firmly. The way you run things. No bureaucracy, no red tape, just compassion and efficiency. We want to replicate that. Maya shook her head. Grant, I'm a waitress, not a director. He leaned forward. You're both. You've proven that. People follow you because they trust you. They see themselves in you. She exhaled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. You make it sound so easy. It's not, he said. But nothing worth doing ever is. There was a long pause between them, the kind that only exists between people who've seen each other at their lowest. Finally, Maya said quietly, You think this could actually work? I know it can, Grant said. Because it already did here. He opened the folder. Inside were maps marked with red circles. Coastal towns vulnerable to storms, towns that didn't have the money or attention that Clearwater Bay had received. We start small. Build partnerships, fund training, install solar-powered shelters. You'll oversee design. I'll handle the funding. Maya stared at the papers, overwhelmed. This is bigger than us. Good, he said. Then maybe it'll last. She looked up at him, eyes softening. You really believe in this, don't you? I believe in you, he said. The words landed with a quiet finality that made her chest tighten. She looked away, pretending to study the maps, but she couldn't stop the faint smile tugging at her lips. Fine, she said finally. I'll help. But only if you promise not to turn it into a PR campaign. Grant chuckled. You've got my word. No cameras. No corporate gloss. Just people helping people. And so it began. Over the next few months, Maya found herself on the road, something she never imagined she'd do. She traveled to nearby towns, Cape Wind, Harbor's End, and Delaney Shore. Each bore its own scars, crumbled houses, shuttered diners, lives still pieced together with duct tape and resilience. But everywhere she went, she saw something familiar in the people's eyes, that same stubborn spark she'd carried the night the hurricane hit. And everywhere she went, people recognized her. Not as a celebrity but as a symbol. Some called her, the waitress who changed the storm. Others simply called her, Hope. It embarrassed her every time, but Grant told her not to fight it. Symbols are important, he said once during a long drive back from a meeting. They remind people that goodness can win. Goodness doesn't pay rent, she said dryly. He laughed. No, but it builds homes. They fell into easy silence after that. The road stretched out before them, the coastline glittering faintly under the moonlight. Maya leaned her head against the window and whispered, half to herself, Sometimes I still hear it, the wind. It's like it's never really gone. Grant's voice softened. Maybe that's the point. Maybe storms never leave us, they just teach us to listen differently. By the 1-year anniversary of the hurricane, the Baylight Relief Center had expanded into 5 towns. Donations poured in quietly without fanfare. Maya had become the face of something larger than she ever intended, not through speeches or campaigns but through presence. She showed up. She worked alongside volunteers. She listened. She remembered names. One evening as she was closing up the diner, a woman entered, middle-aged, rain-soaked, with a little boy clutching her hand. Are you Maya Lopez? She asked timidly. Maya nodded. Yes, ma'am. Can I help you? The woman smiled weakly. You already did. The relief fund your center started, it saved our house. We just wanted to thank you. Maya knelt to meet the boy's gaze. You taking care of your mom? She asked gently. He nodded solemnly. She takes care of me. Maya smiled. Then you both take care of each other. That's the rule. As they left, Maya stood at the door for a long time, staring out at the rain. It wasn't the kind of storm that frightened her anymore. It was soft, rhythmic, like the earth breathing again. Grant arrived later that night, holding 2 cups of coffee. I passed them on the road, he said, handing her one. They looked happy. They were, Maya said quietly. That's enough for me. He studied her for a long moment. You know, I think you've changed how I see the world. Is that a compliment or a warning? She teased. He laughed. Both. They sat in silence for a while, the rain tapping against the window. Then, almost hesitantly, he asked, Do you ever regret not leaving? You could have started over somewhere else. She shook her head. This is home. You don't run from where you're needed most. He nodded slowly. You always know the right thing to say. She smirked. No, I just say the honest thing. There's a difference. Grant's gaze softened. You're right. Honesty is rarer than I thought. Months turned to years and Clearwater Bay flourished. The diner remained the same, no fancy remodels, no rebranding. The only addition was a small brass plaque near the door that read, Baylight Diner, where the storm found shelter and humanity found itself. Tourists would pause to take pictures, but the locals just nodded as they passed. They knew the truth of it. They had lived it. Inside, Maya still poured coffee with the same care she always had. Her hands, once calloused by struggle, now moved with calm purpose. The regulars teased her that she had become the town's unofficial mayor. She just laughed and said, "Don't give me more titles. I barely handle this one." Grant still came by, though now the gray in his hair was more pronounced. He'd long since stepped down as CEO of his firm, choosing instead to run the foundation full-time. The world knew him as a philanthropist now, but Maya knew better. He wasn't saving the world, he was trying to give back what it had taken from him before he learned what mattered. One crisp autumn morning, as the first hints of orange touched the palm trees, he sat across from her, hands folded. "You know," he began, "we've helped rebuild 47 towns now. That's 47 places that won't face storms alone again." "That's a lot of coffee cups," Maya said with a smile. He chuckled. "Yeah. And you're the reason for all of it." She shook her head. "No, Grant. The reason was the storm. We just listened to what it taught us." He smiled faintly. "You always were better at humility than me." She leaned forward. "I wasn't humble. I was scared. But fear can be good. It makes you protect what matters." Grant's eyes softened. "And what matters to you now?" Maya looked around, at the polished counter, the laughter from a table of construction workers, the hum of the jukebox in the corner. "This," she said. "People. Connection. The quiet moments where life feels right." He nodded slowly. "That's a good answer." "You?" she asked. He hesitated. "You," he said simply. Maya blinked, caught off guard. "Grant?" He raised a hand gently. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. The night of that storm, I found something I didn't know I'd lost. Purpose, humility, and you. I won't risk losing any of that again." For once, Maya didn't deflect. She didn't joke or retreat. She just reached across the table and took his hand. It was rougher than she expected, the hand of a man who'd done real work. "You didn't lose it," she said softly. "You rebuilt it. Like the rest of us." They sat that way for a long while, the diner quiet except for the soft clatter of dishes and the steady rhythm of the sea beyond the glass. There were no grand declarations, no promises, just the simple truth of two people who had weathered the worst and come out stronger together. Years later, when Maya's story was told again, in schools, in documentaries, in quiet conversations over coffee, the part that everyone remembered was never the luxury cars or the foundation or the headlines. What they remembered was that one woman, alone in a diner, chose kindness when she had every reason not to. That she gave shelter without question. That she proved goodness still existed. The Baylight Diner became a symbol, but Maya never let it become a monument. "Symbols fade," she'd say. "But actions echo." And echo they did, in the rebuilt homes, in the new businesses, in the volunteers who carried her spirit into other towns. In her later years, Maya often sat by the window during the last hour of service, watching the sun sink low over the water. Grant was always nearby, still teasing her about retiring, still insisting she deserved rest. She always replied the same way, "Rest is for when the work's done." And Grant always answered, "Then I guess I'll never rest either." One evening, as twilight settled over the coast, Maya stood outside the diner and looked up at the fading sign. The letters flickered slightly just as they had after the storm. She smiled, remembering. The wind brushed her hair, carrying the scent of the ocean. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled, distant, harmless, a memory of what once was. She whispered almost to herself, "You didn't win, storm. You only reminded us how to live." Grant stepped beside her, slipping a hand gently onto her shoulder. They stood in silence for a while, watching lightning trace faint veins across the horizon. "Another one coming?" he asked softly. "Maybe," she said. "But we're ready." He smiled. "We always will be." As they turned to go inside, the diner lights glowed against the darkening sky. The neon sign flickered once more, then steadied, bright, constant, defiant. And for as long as the Baylight Diner stood, no storm, not wind, not time, not circumstance, ever managed to dim that light again. This story touched your heart, share it. Let Maya's strength remind the world that kindness isn't weakness, it's the foundation of everything worth saving. Subscribe for more stories of courage, compassion, and the people who prove that even in the darkest storms, light always finds a way through. The years rolled by quietly, like the tide that kissed the edges of Clearwater Bay each morning. Time softened the memory of the hurricane, but it never erased it. People still spoke of the night 12 millionaires sought refuge in a little coastal diner, and how one woman's courage changed them, and the world beyond them. But for Maya Lopez, it wasn't about legend or legacy. It was about the simple act that started it all, opening a door when the storm knocked hardest. The Baylight Diner stood firm through every new season that followed, its windows gleaming beneath the Florida sun. Locals said it was built on something stronger than wood and steel, something unbreakable. Every visitor who walked through its doors could feel it, a sense of warmth that no architect could design, no storm could dismantle. It was humanity distilled. In the mornings, Maya still arrived before dawn. She brewed coffee, arranged chairs, and opened the blinds just as the sky began to glow. Though her hair had silvered with time, her movements remained graceful and sure. Her hands, once rough from years of labor, now carried the soft steadiness of peace earned, not given. And every morning, she paused for one small ritual. She'd stand by the window and whisper a silent thanks to the storm that once nearly destroyed her. "Good morning, old friend," she'd murmur. "You taught me everything." One spring morning, Grant Sinclair entered the diner with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to be known. His once dark hair had turned silver too, but his eyes still held the same clear focus, the kind that could cut through noise and find truth. He'd been spending less time in offices and more time on the road, visiting the centers Maya helped establish. There were nearly 60 now, spread across the coasts and inland flood zones. They called them Baylight Centers, and each bore a small plaque, "Founded in the spirit of kindness by Maya Lopez." He sat in his usual booth and Maya joined him with 2 mugs of coffee. No words were needed at first. They watched the sun rise through the diner's large front window. The reflection shimmered across the ocean, and for a moment, the world outside seemed golden and whole. Grant broke the silence. "You know they're talking about putting your name in the state archives?" Maya snorted softly. "As what, the lady who made coffee during a hurricane?" He smiled. "As the woman who reminded the world how to care." "Let them write whatever they want," she said, sipping her coffee. "What matters is what people do after the headlines fade." Grant nodded. "And they did. You started something no one can undo." She looked out the window. "I didn't start it. The storm did. I just refused to close the door." He studied her face, etched with fine lines that told stories words never could. "You always downplay yourself." "I just know the truth," she said. "You can't control the storm, but you can choose how you stand in it." He smiled faintly. "You still sound like a preacher." She laughed. "Just a waitress with a stubborn streak." Outside, the town had grown. The rebuilt pier bustled with tourists, fishermen, and families. Children played near the water, their laughter echoing through the air. New shops had opened, new homes built, and the scars of the hurricane had long been covered by paint, flowers, and resilience. Yet, in every corner, a trace of that night lingered, a reminder of the fragile balance between destruction and grace. That evening, the town held an anniversary gathering, a quiet celebration marking 15 years since the storm. It wasn't grand like the early ceremonies had been. There were no television crews, no reporters, no millionaires giving speeches. Just neighbors, friends, and volunteers gathering by candlelight at the community park overlooking the water. Maya sat near the front, beside Grant, her hands folded in her lap. The mayor, now gray and stooped, gave a short speech. He spoke of loss, rebirth, and gratitude. Then he called Maya's name. The crowd rose in applause. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of all those years pressed gently on her shoulders. Her voice, though aged, still carried the same quiet strength. "I don't have a speech," she began. "I've said everything I ever needed to in one night, when I told 12 men they were safe here. I didn't know what would happen. I just knew fear is loud and kindness has to be louder. The world doesn't change because of one big act. It changes because someone decides not to turn away." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Every storm we survive, whether it's wind or grief or loneliness, shows us what we're made of. So if you remember anything from me, remember this. When the next storm comes, open your door. Even if it scares you. Even if no one else does. That's how we keep the light alive." The applause that followed wasn't loud or wild. It was reverent, heartfelt, the sound of hundreds of people who understood exactly what she meant. After the gathering, Grant walked her back to the diner. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of salt and honeysuckle. They stopped at the edge of the boardwalk, the sea stretching endlessly before them. "You still come here every night," Grant said softly. "It's home," Maya replied. "And the ocean never stops talking." He chuckled. "Still giving advice?" "Always," she said with a smile. It's the one thing storms can't wash away. They sat on the steps, side by side, watching the waves shimmer under the moonlight. After a while, Grant spoke again. I used to think storms destroyed everything. But now I see they clear the path. They make room for what's supposed to last. Maya nodded, eyes on the horizon. They teach us what can't be broken. He turned to her. You ever think about retiring? She smiled faintly. From kindness. He laughed softly. From the diner, Maya? She shook her head. If I left, it wouldn't feel right. The diner isn't just mine anymore, it's part of the story. People still come in on bad days just to feel safe. I can't take that away from them. He reached for her hand gently. You've given enough. Maybe, she said, squeezing his hand back. But maybe giving is what keeps me alive. The years that followed were peaceful. The Baylight Network expanded internationally, bringing coastal safety programs to the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, and Africa. Maya's story spread across borders, told in classrooms, relief camps, and leadership summits. Yet she never sought the spotlight. Her name became less about fame and more about faith in humanity. She'd receive letters every week, from people who'd faced storms of their own and found strength in her example. One letter, written in trembling handwriting from a child in the Philippines, read, Miss Maya, when our storm came, my mother told us about you. She said we are not alone. We opened our home to 3 neighbors. We all survived. Thank you. When Maya finished reading it, she wept quietly. Grant found her at the counter, the letter still in her hand. She looked at him and said, That's what it's all for. He nodded. That's what it's always been for. As time went on, the diner became almost sacred ground. People visited not just for food but to feel the spirit that lingered there. Couples proposed under the neon light. Families reunited. Veterans shared stories over coffee. It was no longer just a diner, it was a sanctuary built from storm and survival. Maya aged gracefully, her steps slower, her hair pure white. Grant stayed close, their lives intertwined in a quiet rhythm. One evening as they closed up, Maya lingered at the window longer than usual. The horizon glowed crimson and a soft wind rustled the palms. Feels like change coming, she said. Grant smiled. You've said that before. And I've been right every time. He chuckled. If it's another storm, I think the world's ready. She looked at him fondly. It's ready because people like you listened. He took her hand. I only listened because someone taught me how. A few weeks later, Maya didn't open the diner one morning. The town noticed quickly. By noon, a line of familiar faces gathered at the door, whispering her name. Inside, Grant found her sitting peacefully in her favorite booth, a cup of cold coffee beside her, her notebook open. On the last page she had written only one line. The light will never go out. She was gone, quietly, gently, as if she had simply decided her work was done. The news spread through Clearwater Bay like another kind of storm, soft, sorrowful, and uniting. The whole town gathered that evening under a glowing sky to celebrate her life. There were no tears at first, only stories. Stories of small kindnesses, of open doors, of hope reborn in the darkest nights. They spoke of the hurricane that had once taken everything, and given back something greater. Grant stood before the crowd, his voice steady though his heart ached. She didn't save 12 millionaires, he said. She saved 12 souls, including mine. And through them she saved thousands more. Maya taught us that storms don't come to destroy, they come to remind us who we are. When the ceremony ended, the townspeople walked to the beach, carrying candles. They placed them in the sand, forming a ring of flickering light that stretched across the shoreline. From above, it looked like a beacon glowing against the dark, a tribute to the woman who had kept her light burning through the fiercest night. Years later, travelers still came to Clearwater Bay, drawn by whispers of the story. The Baylight Diner still stood, its sign repaired but never replaced. Inside, a framed photograph hung above the counter. Maya standing in her apron beside 12 men in suits, all smiling like they'd just learned something important. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "In memory of Maya Lopez, the light that outlasted the storm." Grant, now an old man, often sat in the corner booth, reading letters from around the world. The Baylight Foundation had reached over 100 towns by then, but the heart of it still beat here, in this diner. Sometimes, when the afternoon sunlight slanted just right, he could almost see her reflection in the glass, wiping down the counter, smiling that familiar, quiet smile. He'd raise his cup toward the reflection and whisper, "Still here, Maya? Still listening." And every time he did, a warm gust of wind would sweep through the open door, rattling the chimes gently, as if the storm itself were answering. If this story touched you, let it remind you that storms, real or unseen, aren't the end. They're the test. Be the person who opens the door, who offers shelter, who believes in kindness even when the world feels cruel. Share this story, comment what it meant to you, and subscribe for more tales that prove humanity's light never fades. Because no matter how dark the night gets, someone somewhere will always keep the light alive.